everybody, Tyrone the God 3 here. Now, before you all hit me with obvious facts that I should obviously already know, yes, I already know, Catherine is not an anime. It's a video game. However, the way Catherine is presented while you're playing it as a game, I like to think of it as an anime with a video game kind of stuck to it. The video game and the overall story don't really mesh a lot, and the factors of the video game don't affect the overall story. It's more or less a thing that you do in order for the character himself to progress. But overall, the story still tells itself more or less the same, and I feel like the story for this is very suited to be an anime. And because of that, I decided to go ahead and review Catherine storyline-wise on Spooktober. I know it's not an anime, and I know it's a weird cop-out for things to look for in order to review for Spooktober, but I really do like the story of Catherine, and I do like how it's presented, and the way it's presented is more or less like an anime, like I said. The only difference, obviously, is that it has a puzzle game attached to it. I won't really be going into any details about the puzzle game. In fact, I won't really talk about the puzzle element of the game at all. I'll be talking about the storyline of it and how the themes and motifs cross over, as well as the characters and the things like that, without giving away any spoilers. Because of this, I'm basically going to give my opinion on whether or not you should buy the game Catherine and whether you should be invested in the storyline of Catherine. So in a way, I'm reviewing it anime-wise, but not. Anyway, with the release from a game company called Atlas, they decided to make a game known as Catherine. What Catherine basically is that you play the role of Vincent Brooks. More or less, Vincent is a character. Vincent Brooks is a character that's introduced into a story who's in a committed relationship to a woman named Catherine. This Catherine, however, her name is spelled with a K and not a C. Know that because it's important for later. Anyway, Catherine is upset with Vincent because he's decided that he should slack off and not be as committed to the relationship as he should be. What I mean by this isn't necessarily what you think it is. It's more or less the fact that he's not fully committed enough to ask him to marry her yet. They've been dating for pretty much a long time, but Vincent just hasn't gotten up the guts to ask her to marry him yet. Nor has he had the guts to go ahead and actually move out of his small apartment and actually start a family with Catherine. Because of this, it adds stress onto Vincent as well as his work schedule, so much to the point where he winds up having to go to a bar known as the Stray Sheep. A regular there, Vincent decides to go get a drink. However, this time he's drinking alone and not with his friends, And because of this, he winds up in some weird hallucinations and ends up meeting a woman named Catherine. Only her name is Catherine with a C. Then he wakes up the next day and finds himself in bed with Catherine with a C, and it seems that the two have, engaged in the good old afternoon. I'm just going to call it that. Shortly afterwards, he winds up at the bar with several of his other friends, and he ends up finding out that people have been getting killed while they've been asleep because they've been having very traumatic dreams, and when they die in their dreams, they end up dying in the real world. This makes the overall storyline for Vincent as he traverses through a lot of his dreams to avoid getting killed and facing the same fate as several others who have died in their dreams. This, combined with the overall stress of trying to hide the fact that he was in a mistress-like cheating situation with Catherine with a C, and keeping this away from Catherine with a K, while at the same time showing that he's with Catherine with this K, but still falling in infatuation with Catherine with a C because Catherine with a C is his type, and yeah, several things like that wind up happening within the course. I'm not going to go ahead and reveal any of the spoilers of anything. I'm just going to say that much about the story. Overall, this is the story of Catherine, and this is what you have to deal with when you play the game. This is basically how the game summarizes itself, and this is how you're introduced to the game. Everything else is just you playing through the storyline and you talking with several other characters to learn little things, and then major things based on several different factors. Now, one key important factor that I should all tell you about is known as the meter or morale system. What this basically is a list of questions and decisions that you can make throughout the game, and once you make them, they lean you towards several paths. The blue represents Catherine with a K, which is representative of a marriage and a committed stand-up relationship, while Catherine with a C is represented by the pink side, or more of the dark path, if you will. The path of being a free womanizer and being able to not be chained down and being able to more or less live life as a free man. It's up to you as the player in order to choose which side you want to go to. Now, while these systems do affect the game, they don't make dramatic cutscene changes. The game more or less plays out the exact same way as it would. The only real difference winds up becoming what happens at the very end of the story. So, with that said, if you all want me to go ahead and review both sides of both endings, which will contain spoilers, I will, but that will have to be something that's either requested or something I feel like doing very much later in my life, probably after Spooktober is over. Anyway, why did I go ahead and decide to review this for Spooktober? Basically, the overall factor of Catherine is that it's a scary game, more or less. The idea of people dying in their dreams, the overall theme of this creepish looming feeling that you could die at any moment, this big weight of fear that Vincent carries when he is in a relationship, but a tainted relationship, as he's shown to have cheated on his could-be fiance. Several things like this just show a looming sense of tension and suspense and fear, even as you, the player, are playing the game. Yes, it's a video game, and you pretty much have as many times as you can in order to come back to life and play over, but even while playing, I couldn't get this sense of a feeling that while things got harder for me, it got much harder for me as a player and as Vincent in order to keep everything together. I won't really explain the mechanics of the game because, like I said, I'm more or less doing an overarching view of the anime, or at least the animated cutscenes that take place within the story. While not going too far into the story, like I said, Catherine has a very good story. It definitely shows itself off really good, and one of the motifs and themes that carries on are really well done and really well written. It shows off the flaws of human beings, as well as showing off the flaws mostly of men and how uncommitted they are, or how they wind up becoming fooled by various elements that take place within them. Temptation and several things like that, as well as stress of being chained down in a relationship, are various themes that repeat throughout the entirety of this story. Now, when several things are revealed, things make more sense once the character Vincent goes through his trials and tribulations in life. Now, I should also mention that there are other characters in the series. There's the bartender known as Erica, who goes through a little bit of a story arc of her own, which you don't really engage in. However, it is mentioned while you're playing the game, and you decide to talk with several of the other characters. Other characters involve Jonathan, one of Vincent's long-time friends, Tobias, a new kid who works in the factory or with them, as well as Orlando, another old-time friend of Vincent's. They all have their own overarching storylines as well, and because of this, they wind up getting the dreams as well. Their storylines don't get as fleshed out as Vincent's, however, it is fun to note that while you're playing the game, you can actually get a little bit of backstory on each of those characters as well. It kind of is a shame to me that they didn't flesh these characters out as much as they could, but given the circumstances, it was good that they at least gave them all backstory so they're not just one-dimensional Vincent's friends. Now, let's talk about the story and the things about it. The story is basically the tale of a man who is more or less in a committed relationship when temptation winds up having him cheat and take upon his urges, which he ultimately suffer consequences because of this. The problem I have with this, though, is that I can't help but shake that they picked the wrong character for this. I know what you're meaning. What? That doesn't make any sense. Anybody can be a womanizer. Anybody can be a cheater. Yes, this is true. But with Vincent, it just feels out of place for me. It more or less feels like Vincent didn't take the time to commit. I don't know exactly what about Vincent's past because the game doesn't really do a good job of explaining that, except for how he met with Catherine with a K. But he doesn't really seem like a womanizer to me. I mean, a lot of his characteristics don't even show off as a womanizer. Given his living circumstances, I don't see him picking up a lot of women anytime soon. In fact, I think Catherine with a K is probably the only woman who would really put up with him in a situation like this. Another small issue I have with the story of Catherine is the story of Catherine, obviously. Now, I know what you're thinking. You just said you praised the story. I praised the motifs and lessons that it gives in the end. However, I can't shake that there's this one giant flaw that exists within the story, and that's if Vincent had went ahead and told Catherine with a C that he's in a committed relationship. I mean, don't get me wrong. All men have been there, where they don't really quite want to mention that they're in a relationship with another woman, more or less because they're attracted to that woman. But this is just ridiculous. A lot of these situations that Vincent winds up getting himself in could have simply been avoided if he had just said that he had a girlfriend, that he was in a committed relationship. This even gets mentioned several times within the storyline once they're in the Stray Sheep. Yeah, there is a lot of times when Vincent's also in the bar talking with his friends about the situation. He doesn't go too far into detail because he doesn't want rumors to go ahead and leak, but he does give like semi-subtle clues as to what's going on within his dreams. Not too obvious, but something that is definitely noteworthy. The problem I have with this, like I said though, is that a lot of these situations could have simply been avoided if Vincent just told the truth. I mean, and I'm not just talking about to Catherine with a C. I also feel like if Vincent had told the truth to Catherine with a K, yeah, things wouldn't have ended as well for him, but they more or less would have worked out. I mean, the situation would have at least been taken care of. But then again, if he went ahead and said that, the game wouldn't exist. Overall, I do like the characters. However, some issue I have with some of the characters would include Catherine with a K as well as Catherine with a C. Yeah, the two Catherines are the ones I mainly have the problems with, simply because one doesn't mesh well. Catherine with a K seems to be this woman that's devoted to commitment, and she's a stand-up woman, and she's basically supposed to be like the righteous every woman that every man's supposed to strive for if they want to get their future straight. While Catherine with a C is obviously the much younger woman, the seductive woman that tries to get you in your wild and young phase. It's what every man kind of strives for in order to become, the young bachelor-like man that's dating these very young, pretty chicks. So both of these characters do work well. Unfortunately, their personalities don't mesh well when given one circumfactor, and that's Vincent himself. Vincent, from what I see, is too jittery. He's too nervous. He's too paranoid and insecure of himself. If Ed had much more of a stand forward character who seems to have been more experience with relationships, I think it would have worked out. But from that we see here, it seems that Catherine with the K is the only one that would really put up with Vincent's ridiculousness. And even in the end, it doesn't even seem like Catherine with the K deserves a man like Vincent, if to say so myself. I don't want to be harsh, but that's more or less what it looks like to me sometimes. Regardless, Vincent does show to be a stand-up character towards the end, but overall, his overarching personality doesn't show to be anything that is stupendous. He's not your out-of-the-mill anime character, and he comes off a lot like many of the romantic and comedic animes come off as. A very klutzy character with a mindset that he can't really get it together. This more or less makes for a good idea, but not for a great character when given both Catherine with a K and Catherine with a C. Is Vincent a bad character? No, by none of the means. It's just the situation he's given could have simply been solved if, he had come at it with more maturity, I guess. I guess that was the whole point of you, the player, trying to use Vincent overall as a character in order to shape out things. He does have his heart in the right place, and it does show within most of the cutscenes within the game. So it does show his personality off a bit. However, when he's in the situations of romance, it doesn't seem like he really meshes well. But overall, it's a good story, and I definitely think it's a good game to go ahead and get. So, with that said, see you all then.